We're live. Greetings, I'm Richard Dolan, and welcome to episode 2 of Intelligent Disclosure. Happy to be here with you. I'm with my wife, Tracy, who actually, there she is.
Hi.
We're back at our home. We're in Rochester, New York, where we live. Um, and I just want to thank everyone for being here. I actually love doing this. I really enjoy and appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk with you live. It's not something that I've done for since forever, and now here we are in a new era. It's new for me, where I get to do this. Last week, we met with you from Whistler, British Columbia. We were doing a lot of travel, but we're back now after a great deal of travel. So, and by the way, this is our office. We actually call this the collab room. This is our little title for collaboration room. Tracy and I work here pretty much every day. I'm at this desk, or we'll read a book on the couch, and it all happens right here in our home. So, last thing I'll just mention, if you're ever in Rochester, if you're ever in this neighborhood, there is the best, and I mean best, chicken place right on the corner. But that's another story for another time. I want to thank our producers, that is Lori and Michael Moriarty, who have really been instrumental. And without them, I wouldn't be able to do this with you. So I want to just put a shout out to them and thank you. Lori's doing the moderating of the chat. Michael's running all the tech that allows this to happen. And Tracy, of course, I wouldn't be able to do any of this without her. Tracy's fielding me questions, which I'll be doing in just a moment. Before we get into the questions, I just wanted to say that I've been thinking a lot about one particular thing in this field, and it comes up again and again. And it's the importance of distinguishing between personalities that are constantly the topic of conversation in ufology and the actual subject itself. You know? Because we don't get interested in the subject of UFOs because we really think such and such a person is interesting. We get interested, I would like to think, in the subject of UFOs because UFOs themselves are interesting. And then, hopefully, presumably, you find individuals in that field who have something to say that you appreciate. But it shouldn't be the other way around. In my view, that's the opposite. And there's always a danger in this field for us to get really worked up over whatever drama, whatever new awful thing or great thing or whatever's happening, courtesy of one particular researcher or one particular person. And I just want to, because this is happening again. And I'm not even getting into names this week. I'm not going to do it. I wrote an article on our site, Richard Dolan Members, called Sticking to the Main Line. And all that means is it's an old statement that one jazz great said to another. King Oliver said it to a young Louis Armstrong back in the 1920s. And he's like, stick to the main line, kid. And what did he mean? Real simple. In that context, it was like, don't go crazy on your solos and you'll lose sight of the melody. And I like that expression, sticking to the main line. It makes me think of stay to the important things in life and stay to the important things in a particular subject. And in the context of ufology, sticking to the main line means following the phenomenon. And for that matter, following the cover up. Following, in other words, the elements about this subject that are substantive, not following drama of individual people. So, with that, that'll be my little preface for what we're going to get into now. I wanted to talk a little bit about crash retrievals. And it's interesting, there were two questions in advance that will allow me the opportunity to kind of get into that in some detail. So, with that, Tracy's got our questions. She's going to be reading them. And did you want to run
Yeah.
that first question
Yeah.
by?
Okay. So, this was
I'm having
some.
people look at you.
Okay. Hi.
There we go.
Someone would like to know your thoughts on the Aztec crash. The Ramsey's thoroughly researched books on this and pretty much convinced this person that there was indeed a retrieval. Could you weigh in on this Oh, that's from
Oh, I'd like
Scott.
to, but that's the second one. There was another one on the ATIP program
Oh,
you
the
wanted me to
ancient
talk
program.
about. You got
Yes.
that in there.
Okay. If you believe there's a secret space program,
Right.
couldn't the Tic Tac UFO
Yeah.
in the TTSA video be part of that?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I don't want to move the camera too far away from you.
No.
People
Go
should
ahead.
see you as well. You're right here. So this first question, and then I'll deal with the Aztec question too, because they're both kind of germane to what I want to get into. The Tic Tac UFO video, if you don't know about this by now, you got to learn what this is. This is released in a big way last December. It actually happened, the event happened in 2004 off the Southern California coast. Commander David Fravor of the U.S. Navy was one of actually 4 individuals in the Navy. He was the pilot. There's 2 guys in his plane. There's 2 guys in another F-18A Super Hornet. They're intercepting an unknown object off the coast of California, off the coast of San Diego, and it's shaped like a large Tic Tac. So it's elongated, white, at the surface of the ocean, and it does unbelievable things. All right, everyone by now I think has listened to Fravor speak, and again, if you haven't, find him. He's on YouTube. He's very easy. And he described an object that does things that, frankly, should be impossible by the standards of our contemporary technology, right? The object is hovering at or near the water, perhaps going in the water. This might be a genuine case of a USO, that is an unidentified submersible object. That is a water-based UFO. I think that there's a really good case that this is what we were dealing with. The object was either under the water slightly or just above the water or on the water. The water was frothing around it. And it eventually, he circles around as he's coming to meet it. It's circling around on the opposite end of the circle as he's coming down, obviously reacting to him, and then shoots up and zooms away at a speed that is in many thousands of miles per hour. My own calculation, if you just go 2 miles in 10 seconds, 10 miles in 2 seconds, which is what he said, that's about 9,000 miles per hour. It's ridiculously fast. I don't know of anything, and Fravor didn't know of anything that we had that could do that. So that's the basic account. There's the video. Let's leave the video aside for the moment. But is the Tic Tac UFO evidence, as this question asks, of a breakaway civilization's technology? That is the black world UFOs that are made by us, that have an encounter with the white world, the above board official U.S. military. And I guess I would have to say the answer is we don't really know. I mean, it's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. One reason I will say this is that my strong contention, I'm going to get into this a little bit further down in this presentation with you, is that for 70 years, longer than most of us have been alive, the United States military has been actively seeking to understand and replicate technology that does not come from here. Alien, extraterrestrial, whatever we want to call it. There have been leak after leak after leak going back decades. And these are leaks by responsible journalists who've had long-standing connections with Groom Lake facility. I'm thinking of people like James Goodall back in the 1980s, who was an aviation aerospace writer who had cultivated many contacts from Groom Lake, that is the explicitly of black technologies and black budget programs to recreate UFOs. It's not just Goodall. A number of other leaks have come out over these years that make me think that we've got some very, very sophisticated technologies. I give a lot of credit to the 1988 story, The Alien Reproduction Vehicle, from aviation executive Brad Sorensen. And if you take that story the way it appears, then as of 30 years ago, the United States military, black world, was in possession of a craft that essentially looked like a flying saucer, but that they were operating that was going off-world. and doing all kinds of exploration of the solar system. It sounds like a far out story, but I will simply say that a number of people that have interviewed Sorensen, and I know some of those individuals, I've never met him. And it seems to me that there's reason to take that seriously. So, having said that, this is a long-winded answer to this question. Is it possible that the Tic Tac UFO is something that we made? I use the word we loosely, because I'm not part of the team that made that UFO, and neither are you if you're asking the question. But I think it's a possibility. This is one of these things about the UFO subject that, it's a little frustrating because we want answers. And the fact is, we have many, many more questions than we have answers. The real thing to ask about that UFO isn't, are we making it? I mean, that's absolutely worthwhile asking. But a more interesting question from my point of view is, how does that object do what it does? What is the science behind the propulsion, particularly of that object, that allows it utterly to outperform the number one interceptor of the United States Navy? That takes some doing. It's not some magical thing. It's real existing technology. And the thing we should be asking is, what is it that allows that object to do what it did? Hover, move around, zoom off, instant acceleration, gone in 2 seconds. So that's really the question I want to ask. Now, let me move on to the question about Aztec. That's from our member site member, Scott Sanda, who is a friend of mine. I just want to thank Scott. This is years later, but when I was doing research for my second volume of UFOs in the National Security State, I had a lot of people who helped me, and Scott was one of them. Scott gave me a sizable collection of old UFO journals, MUFON UFO Journal, International UFO Reporter, and I believe other publications as well. And Scott, I just want you to know, I've never forgotten that, and I will never forget it. You really helped me out and helped me with critical aspects of my research. I will always appreciate that. So Scott's question had to do with the Aztec UFO. It's an interesting little story, and this is relevant for the ATIP program. That is the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, and I'll tell you why. Let me adjust my microphone. Hold on. Okay. The Aztec UFO crash happened in the spring of 1948, so a little less than a year after Roswell. Now, everyone's heard about Roswell. Not many people have heard about Aztec, and that's a shame. The fact is that Aztec is the crash that actually got major public attention before any of the others. Roswell happened and was debunked immediately, and the world forgot about it. Aztec started getting attention in the short aftermath of the event and was subject of investigation by a journalist named Frank Scully. And if you've watched the X-Files, the name Scully is an homage to Frank Scully. So anyway, Frank Scully wrote the first major U.S. published book on the flying saucer phenomenon, on UFOs, and it was called Behind the Saucers. I have a copy of it, and it's actually a really good book. To this day, things that Scully wrote in that introduction and in his book, you can see that this is a guy who was very sophisticated, and he wasn't just some wide-eyed, gullible dreamer in even the United States government. In 1950, most Americans were. Scully had a very careful eye, and you could read in his introduction. He knew that it was about power, it was about empire. Anyway, Scully writes about the Aztec UFO crash and was immediately trashed, savaged by the mainstream media. They tore this apart. They said this is all a big hoax. Turns out the guy who savaged Scully's work was a journalist named Bob Considine. And Considine was a guy with an attitude, and as we have now learned. But his work was very, very significant. It allowed the public just to dismiss the whole Aztec crash as, nothing to pay attention to. And from that time onward, for the next 25 plus years, no one in the UFO field was really willing to take crash retrieval seriously. The whole thing just went away for a long time. That's really significant. That's really significant. So Scott and Suzanne Ramsey are both friends of mine. I've known them for about 15 years. And I met them back in 2003 when Scott started the research on revitalizing the Aztec event. And he and Suzanne worked together. And eventually, I think in 2010, 2011, published a book reopening the Aztec case. And I want to say to you, this is a very fine book where they make several cases. They argue very, very clearly that the entire argument against Aztec was deeply motivated by a kind of personal vendetta. It had nothing to do with the merits of the Aztec case whatsoever. When they started reinvestigating the case, they found a great deal of smoke and a little bit of fire. They found a very, very good location for the crash site, which seems to be legit, and much, much more. What I would say is that those two people, Scott and Suzanne Ramsey, have done more than enough to make serious researchers say, yeah, Aztec crash was genuine. And it's taken a time for some of the old line UFO researchers to revise their opinion, but you see it happening. So they have revised their opinion. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about these crash retrievals in the context of the ATIP program is as follows. The New York Times, back in December, publishes this article on this Pentagon program. We call it the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or is it the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program? Who really knows? Both names are out there. This is not clear. John Greenwald, who runs the Black Vault, recently made very, very cogent remarks about this discrepancy, and a lot of other people have commented. But the point is, New York Times puts out this article on the ATIP program as if to say, wow, the Pentagon's investigating UFOs. Well, how interesting. Here's the thing. UFOs have been deeply, deeply researched and studied and pondered about and have been matters of action interest by the U.S. military for over 70 years. So when you have the New York Times stating that this program ran from 2007 to 2012, I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? All right, there's so much more to the study of the UFO phenomenon within the military that just blithely goes by. No one comments on this. And to state that they have spent $22 million over 5 years, which is less than nothing by Pentagon standards. All right? This is not credible. And yet, what should be galling to the public, I mean, yes, it's good that this is out there. It's good that we've kind of moving a little bit forward in our public discussion on UFOs, but it should be galling, at least a little bit, that they are putting this bland information out there as if there's nothing else, as if there's no other program, as if there's not a major effort to study this from a national security defense point of view, and not simply the U.S., by the way, but globally, to say nothing of the research and development technology issues at stake. All right, so this phenomenon is so massive and it is so fundamentally transformative and powerful from just a military point of view. So the real challenge for researchers is, the immediate one is it's hard enough, apparently, getting to the bottom of the ATIP program. That's difficult. You got very good researchers around the world right now who are trying to get behind all of this. And they're struggling. They're getting denials from the Pentagon about the existence of any such program. So what's that all about? They put this information out, they acknowledge it, but then they provide no information, no documentation on anything to do with the nature of this program. So that's hard enough. But think about how hard it will be, but how necessary it will be to get information on a much, much larger program to study and presumably replicate UFOs themselves. All right. And I think that it will be possible to do this, but we have a long way to go. Fortunately, there's been enough credible research over the years to validate a phenomenon like crash retrievals and to give us a good overview of the parameters of how this program would be operating. In other words, where the technology might be studied, and so you have Area 51 or south of Area 51. You've got Wright-Patterson Air Force Base itself, and a number of other places where this appears to have been and appears to be studied. And we have certain ideas about how this is operating, but there's still a lot we need to learn. So, how are we doing for time? Are we good?
Yeah, we're doing great.
Great.
I just want to come in for a second, and I
Jump in.
want to say thank you to Minnesota Folk, Spasmodic 76, Robert Dixon, Hornby 1. Thank you so much for your super chats. And Robert Dixon wants to know the name of the amazing chicken place that is our big secret.
The People's Choice, baby.
Oh my God, it's so good.
Listen, that woman who runs it she's like not human. There's an extraterrestrial. She's got some magical ways with chicken, like I'll never figure that out. Like
It's true.
It's tender, it just melts.
Yeah, it's intoxicating too. It's close by, so she cooks it outside,
And you
the
smell it.
smell comes, and we have to control
It's
ourselves
not fair. It's not
to
fair.
not go there every single day. But it's
Good
amazing.
prices.
Yeah.
Good prices, and yeah, you like it. Last summer, here at this house, I had a bunch of construction renovation guys over every day. I was out there working. We did renovations on my attic and everything else. And basically for lunch, go over to Vans, get the chicken, bring it over. We had good times.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
People's Choice. Check it out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next.
Okay, so let's just do a quick one. And people were asking last week. People have been sending emails, and they want to know because Stanton Friedman is retiring, as we all
yes.
know, and he made a huge contribution to the field as a researcher. And people want to know if you're going to do a last interview with him.
I want to, yes. So thank you for this question. By the way, this is live, but when we hit the desk, like this is shaking our we got to set up a different system here. So I've got this on my phone on a little tripod, and sometimes when we hit the desk, it shakes the camera. So we're going to be careful.
Everybody. That was me.
No biggie. So I spoke with Stanton a little over a week ago when we were in Toronto, wasn't it? And a couple of weeks ago. And I told him that I would really like to do an interview with him, either for the Richard Dolan show or maybe we can do a live thing. I have a feeling a pre-recorded interview might be best at this point, but he completely agreed. He was very happy to do it. And what I would like to do with Stanton is chat with him for a couple of hours and give a kind of retrospective on his career. To me, this is the most interesting thing that I would like to do with him is talk with him. I mean, he's been doing ufology since publicly since the 1960s. All right. He's been interested in it since the 50s, but he's been out speaking since the 1960s on the matters of UFOs. And he's had friends and enemies along the way. Most notoriously back in the 1970s and 80s, Philip J. Klass, who was the leading skeptic debunker of the time. And I found a document in the Canadian National Archives back in 2005 by Philip Klass that he sent to the Canadian government. Tracy's fixing the camera here.
We're making a little adjustment here.
Great.
Our producers are asking.
That's fine. In which Klass really underhandedly stabbed Stanton in the back, trash-talking him, bad-mouthing him. And what was odd is that Stan, all that time, had a friendly, adversarial relationship with Klass. They would have dinner together sometimes. Stan had no idea that Klass was double-dealing him in that way. So I would like to speak with Stanton about some of the interesting personalities, but also fundamentally, I would like to talk with him about his basic assessment after all these years of what it is we're dealing with. I know as well as you know, if you're asking this question, that he believes that there are extraterrestrials, non-humans, that are operating some of these UFOs. He stated this many times. But what I would like to do is speak with him in a little bit more of an intimate way and maybe in a little bit more of a philosophical way to try to get him to talk about this. So thank you for the question. I would really like to do this with Stanton Friedman. I have a feeling we'll set up an interview at some point this summer, and I think we can make it happen. So thanks.
Okay. I'm gonna just do. We have a super chat from Amphion right now. Thank you, Amphion. And a question: does Bush Senior know all there is to know on UFOs? Maybe the question is: do you think presidents know all there is to know on UFOs?
Thanks for the question. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, I would love it. Tracy and I would appreciate if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel. That really helps me out, and also turn on notifications so that you don't miss an episode of Intelligent Disclosure, or in fact any other releases that I have on my YouTube channel. I'm very, very active these days on YouTube. That's not going to end. I'm very engaged with what we're doing. So please subscribe and please turn on your notifications. I would really appreciate that. Now, what was the question?
Oh, it was whether, do you think presidents know everything there is to know about UFOs?
Yes, exactly. So this is a matter I've had conversation and occasional disagreement with my friend Grant Cameron about this. And Grant really knows a lot about presidential UFO policy. I don't believe that every president has been fully briefed on this. Now, I have really no way of knowing this. The only thing I can go on is a very persuasive conversation I had a number of years ago with a high-level gentleman from CIA. Now, you might just say, well, why believe anyone from the CIA? And fine, you can say that, but I suppose I will say that I particularly do believe this man on this statement. So that's all I can tell you. And I asked him, how much do presidents know about UFOs? Pretty straightforward question. And his answer was, and I will never forget this, he said, some have known more than others. And he started with Reagan. He said Reagan knew. Reagan had a very good understanding and assessment of the UFO phenomenon. Bush Sr. knew. He said Reagan and Bush Sr. both were fairly fully briefed on the phenomenon. And in the case of Bush Sr., since that was the question that was asked here, I would have to agree with this. George Bush Sr. Was not just a U.S. president from 1989 to 1993. He was formerly the director of the CIA under the last year of the Jimmy Carter White House. And the other thing about George Bush that really has to be said relating to the CIA, officially speaking, if you go to George Bush's Wikipedia page, for example, it will only have him in the CIA for that 1 year. So the impression is that he was a purely political appointee by Jimmy Carter. No, excuse me, not Jimmy Carter. What am I? My brain's not. Gerald Ford, the last year of Gerald Ford. My bad. So that was 1976. In any case, Bush was appointed, you would think, as a political appointee by Gerald Ford. Now, I think there's a very strong case that George Bush Sr. had a long-standing relationship to the CIA, going back to 1963, including the assassination of John F. Kennedy. This is probably more to get into. I could probably return to this sometime, but I had a conversation with the late Jim Mars, and what you find out is that George Bush Sr. was almost certainly actively with the CIA in relation to the Kennedy assassination in 1963. There's a memo from 2 or 3 days after the Kennedy assassination that surfaced when George Bush was vice president under Reagan. And this memo was directed to J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI. And it referenced a meeting that Hoover had, or was it, I think it was a memo by Hoover of the FBI, and it referenced a meeting that Hoover had with George Bush of the CIA. That's all it said. George Bush of the CIA in matters pertaining to the recent assassination. Now, this memo surfaces, and the world at the time was like, oh my God, George Bush, CIA, and Bush's people at the time said, no, 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 different George Bush. And they said, see, here's another George Bush who was in the CIA at the time. Well, the funny thing is that a couple of journalists followed up and found that George Bush. He was still alive at the time. He's like, are you kidding me? I was a low-level functionary. I had nothing to do with it. J. Edgar Hoover, I never got to meet Hoover. He was just a low-level bureaucrat. But our George Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, he was already a player. So my point is, George Bush Sr. was absolutely front row center of the Kennedy assassination. He was a major team player throughout the 1960s and throughout the 1970s. That's how he became so powerful. So when he became director of the CIA in 1976 by Gerald Ford, it was like, yes, we're going to have our reliable people in to manage this situation. So yes, I think George Bush Sr. knows everything there is to know fundamentally about this phenomenon. I would be shocked if he didn't. He was very close with Henry Kissinger, who also ditto. Kissinger has known, I think, everything there is to know about UFOs. As far as other presidents, it's a trickier issue to answer. I don't know. Bill Clinton, you could argue back and forth. Did he know a lot or did he not know a lot? I assume Bill Clinton knows enough at this point.
And one of our super chats would like to know, Boris Bellatrix, thank you so much. Would like to know, what about Trump? You know, how much do you think Trump knows?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to this question. I would like to know. I'm only speculating here. My take on Trump is as follows. All right, I've said this many times, so I'm not saying this as a supporter or as an attacker of Donald Trump, because I'm not part of this. I really explicitly stay out of the I love or I hate Trump schools of thought. But I do see Trump as an outsider coming in. I've always seen this. So, and you really can see this where he made many powerful enemies within the CIA, within the FBI, within the national security apparatus. This is why I believe Michael Flynn was kneecapped right out of the gate. They took him out because Flynn was actually one of the few high-level defense officials of the Obama era who was willing to talk about Islamic State as a creation, at least in part, of the U.S. intelligence community. My God, who does that? Flynn did that. And Trump picked Flynn to be his leader of national intelligence. Good God, can you imagine the significance of that? Well, there was a scandal right out of the gate, and the media tainted Flynn with Russia, and he never even got into office. So that's Flynn. So that tells me that Trump has had adversaries within what's called the deep state. And that's a real thing. There is a real deep state. It's the state within the state behind the state. Now, the real question is, where is he now? It's been almost 2 years, a year and a half. He's surrounded by a lot of neocon empire people, just like Hillary Clinton would have been. There's really no difference there. Just like Obama was and just like George W. Bush was. So you've got the empire people all around him. They're all itching, for example, to start a war with Iran, whether they make up evidence or not. They want that. So it's possible that Trump has caved enough to that crowd that he might be given some of these secrets. Because what the CIA man once said to me was, he said, look, presidents come and go. Some are reliable and some are not reliable. And the strong impression that I got from him, excuse me, was that not all of them are able to get access to it. Now, Grant Cameron believes otherwise. He believes that if the president is adamant, he has the legal authority to get access to this information. And at this point, I think he and I are we'll have to agree to disagree. And Grant may be right, but he may not be. And I don't know where Trump is on this. The other thing to keep in mind is how interested is Trump in this as a political matter at this time. He's got his hands filled with everything else. He's doing a summit with Putin coming up where he's getting all kinds of grief from the mainstream media just for meeting with the evil Vladimir Putin. Can you imagine how upside down our world is right now, where it's become a bad thing to have a summit with the president of the other nation that has a nuclear arsenal that could destroy the world? Like, that's a good thing. Memo to everyone. It's a good thing that these two presidents are set to meet. And it's a bad thing to keep them in a state of hostility with each other. Just going to say that. So that's my thought on Trump. I don't know. I don't know if he is or isn't. So I'm not going to lie and pretend that I know something that I don't. What do we have here?
Do you know Ron Pandolfi from CIA, Weird Desk, quote unquote?
I do not. I've never spoken with Ron Pandolfi. I certainly know who he is. I've known about Ron Pandolfi in various ways for many years, but I've never had a conversation with him. My attitude with CIA is as follows. Look, in the winding road that I've had in this field, I've encountered a number of individuals who've worked with the U.S. intelligence community. How could I not, right? And within the U.S. military as well. And but not Pandolfi. I've not ever met with him. I've never communicated with him. So some of these people are, I think, credible, and some maybe not so credible. And every person's got their own. You have to assess each person on their own merits. But maybe one day I'll meet Pandolfi.
Okay, so here's another question. What are some good sources and or books for learning remote viewing? Maybe we want to talk about remote viewing a little bit.
Wow.
Someone said they've been interested in this topic for a long time and want to learn, but don't trust half the things that they see on YouTube.
All right, well, Tracy's going to have to answer some of it. You have to answer some of this. Like, as far as books go, there's a lot of books. Let's move this around for you here. As far as books go, just I don't know about how to do remote viewing. I don't know how good I am to provide a book on that. I'm a strong believer in the book by Jim Marrs called Spies. So if you want to know the history of the U.S. intelligence community's remote viewing program, that's a great book to read, Spies. Also, some of the books by Ingo Swann, I would say are good for remote viewing. Ingo's no longer with us. So we have his what is that called? Powers of the Super Bio Mind?
I forget.
He's had some crazy titles.
Yeah, called Penetration.
He had a book called Penetration.
Yeah. His stuff is really, really interesting. I think Penetration has a lot of the stories, right, that you've often recounted. Some of his other books, he takes a little while to get to his point, but he is basically describing that he thinks the mind is designed to reach out to other things. This, which I've said many times, I don't feel like, if you've done remote viewing, our minds are necessarily designed for here, because those skills aren't really valued here, but they're because you can sort of see beyond time and space. We know this. So he kind of talks about that, how it seems like our minds may have been designed for something greater than just here on this planet.
Here's
Am
a
I
question.
explaining that?
No, you are.
Okay,
I want to ask you though, you did study remote viewing formally. Tracy, for 2 years, did remote views 5 days a week, multiple targets a day. Is that correct?
I did 6 targets twice a week for 2 years. And
okay, close.
I was trained in all the different levels by Paul Elder. Whoops.
We almost had a little situation there.
So I can recommend him personally. Paul Elder now trains for the Monroe Institute. I don't know if he works out of the Monroe Institute in Virginia, but I know that he lives in Canada and he has a place that he teaches there as well.
Right.
So that's one place. As far as books, I mean, you probably are always safe to stick to the people who were in Project Stargate. Skip Atwater, who was highly involved in that, has his own books, and this just to give you,
yes,
right. But as far as some of the stuff on YouTube, I haven't taken the time to look at all of it, but a few things that I've seen, I wasn't, I don't know, I was trained in a little bit of a different way. It's called coordinate remote viewing, which Ingo Swann was a very big part of. And with the results that I personally had and witnessed and felt, saw it was absolutely incredible. So I highly recommend coordinate remote viewing if you want to learn a certain type. These newer types that are coming out, I really can't speak to.
I realize what we're going to have to do soon, like seriously, is do a live video where we talk about your remote viewing. Like, we're going to have to do that.
We could do that.
All right.
Yeah.
I assume that will be popular. I have to tell you, I know many of Tracy's remote viewing stories, and they're really, really good. She's talked about a few of them in some interviews now, but I know, like, the thing about Tracy, if I can just say this on your behalf, she has a gift for describing the remote viewing process in a way that I have never heard any remote viewer ever describe. So it's something that you really can offer people. Like, when you describe how you've done your remote view is, I think you're able, more than anyone else I've ever listened to give a sense of how that process actually works for the person doing it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I think I can sort of break it down in a way that people can understand, but I'll just say this. There's two really basic parts to it. There's more than this. I'm oversimplifying here, but one part is quieting down your mind. So I think I was quite successful with it because I was a deep meditator. So I was used to sort of quieting the left brain and allowing the right brain to reach out. So there's one large component is quieting the mind.
Yeah.
And the other large component, again, oversimplifying, is a process of probing your mind with a series of questions. So that's it in a nutshell.
Good.
But I'm going to let
Richard. We'll come back to this.
Show.
No. I'm very glad. I always like it when Tracy jumps in, and I have a feeling viewers like it too. So the fact is, you're interesting, and I like what you had to say about remote viewing.
Thank you.
So I don't have much more time, but there's a question on the simulation hypothesis.
Yes.
Do you want to read that one?
Sure. Yeah, I'm super intrigued by the simulation hypothesis as well. And it was something that Elon Musk came out and said he felt it was a 1 billion to 1 chance that this was base reality, and I've not been able to stop thinking about it. So this Jason, one of our members, said, might there be anything fruitful to the idea that our reality is simulated?
Right.
Could UFOs, paranormal, etc., be seen as mere bugs in our simulation?
Okay.
Or other simulations hacking into ours?
All right, I like that. There's a little bit more there, but that's a good question. So if you don't know what the simulation hypothesis is, I'll just very briefly. The idea, this is a very fascinating and slightly unsettling idea, at least in my opinion. So it's the idea, everyone knows the Matrix, where you're living in a simulated reality. But the simulation hypothesis takes it a step further, and it argues that not only is this reality a simulation like the Matrix, but that you are basically, you're an intelligent algorithm that has consciousness and thinks that you are a biological organism. Now you might think, well, that's kind of crazy. Why would I believe that? I first read the simulation hypothesis in an article by a man named Nick Bostrom, who's one of the leading proponents of the simulation hypothesis. And he's a very brilliant man. And he basically put it this way. He said, look, imagine a future in which you will have a complete immersive virtual reality experiences. And I think we can all imagine that can happen, right? He said, imagine further that future VR tech and artificial intelligence will have the ability to create an immersive historical environment for you to live in. If you want to live in Renaissance England, they can create that environment with all the people in your village and in the country, all those people who are themselves intelligently interacting with you, because that's how smart and how capable future AI could be, perhaps. So then he goes further. He says, so imagine furthermore that there's actually a virtually unlimited number of simulated environments that would be available. You could go to Elizabethan England, or you could go to ancient Rome, or you could have some kind of crazy future tech experience, or whatever. He says it's virtually limitless. He says, so think about that, and then ask yourself this question. If all those algorithms inside those programs believe that they are real human beings, what makes you think that you are living in the one base reality when there's millions and billions and maybe trillions of potentially simulated realities that are out there? What are the odds? Well, Bostrom would say pretty low. And that's what Elon Musk has recently said. He think, what did he put it? The odds of us living in base reality are like 1,000,000,000 to 1, or
Yep, 1,000,000,000 to 1.
1,000,000,000 to 1. So I mean, does Musk know any better? Let me fix this camera just for a second here. Does Musk know any better than anyone else? Who knows? I don't know. But the real question is, are we in a simulated reality? And the answer is, I don't know, and you don't know, and none of these people know. It's a fascinating idea. The one problem with a simulation hypothesis, it's the obvious problem. We don't know how to test it. It's not testable. It's not what a scientist would call falsifiable. At least I don't think it is. You can't prove it true or false. So it could be true, but from a strictly scientific point of view, I might say it's not valid. That's, I think, what many scientists would say. It's not a valid argument to say that we're living in a simulation. But it could be true. And it's a hard one to disprove. And I think the further and further we lurch into the future, the more it might seem that a simulation hypothesis is totally plausible. And if we are in a simulation reality, then the question is, what are these UFOs? What are ghosts or other things that don't seem to make sense in our, strictly speaking, materialistic Newtonian universe, right? Because they don't. Or other types of synchronicities, or people who follow astrology, for that matter, who will argue that, hey, that seems to work. Why does it work? There's no logical reason why astrology should ever work. None. Right? It makes no sense. Even a professional astrologer really couldn't tell you why it works in terms of physics. It doesn't make sense. How could the gravitation or the position of various planets and whatever and the stars have any effect whatsoever on your personality? But an astrologer will make all kinds of arguments why it does. And I don't know that it works, but I've listened to some of these people and they can sound pretty persuasive, right? So if that's real, if synchronicities are real, I published 2 books by my friend Mike Cleland that are all about synchronicities. And let me tell you something. Some of the stories in that book are, you can't just throw them away. There's something about the structure of this reality that makes me wonder, is there something like a meta-intelligence, what I call a meta-intelligence, that is an overarching intelligence that's managing us like we're characters in a video game? I don't know, but I wonder. For me, though, I guess what I would have to say is that I have to go through this reality as if this universe makes sense in a physical way. Or else, because I don't want to live in a world that doesn't make sense. So maybe we can call that an enabling assumption, something that allows me to function in this world and in this society and in my life. I'd like to do that. But in reality, like, it could be, if we're in a simulation, I may never know, and Tracy may never know, and you may never know that we're in a simulation, because it would be literally an impossibility to know one way or the other. So in that sense, the person who wrote the question says, is this an intellectual cul-de-sac, a dead end? And I don't know if it's a total dead end, because I think it's interesting to ask these types of questions. But in a sense, it may be impossible really to know. And so for that reason, I don't know how much time I personally am going to spend on thinking about a simulation hypothesis, but it sure is interesting. And thanks for the question. I have a feeling a lot of people are interested in this, and it wouldn't shock me to come back to it in a future episode of Intelligent Disclosure. How are we doing for time, and how are we doing for questions?
We're doing all right for time, and
let's let the people see you.
Yeah. Oh, hi everybody.
There's Tracy.
So first of all, I just want to thank you guys for the super chats. It's just been amazing. Minnesota folk, thank you so much. You've been so kind. Pilot Style 123, Amphion, and Vicky Ledgard, I think it was. Thank you so much for your super chats.
Thanks, guys.
And we also just want to give a shout out, because we have such a crowd from all over the place.
I can't watch any of the chats.
You know, he doesn't get to see this. And I know someone said, who is posting as Richard Dolan. So that will either be me, Lori, or Michael. We are the team that help Richard through this. So they will either post as their own name or as Richard. It's just how we help get the information to you.
And let me just say this about the team that does this on my behalf. It's honestly, I'm sure you could realize, it's impossible for me to be able to respond to everything that's going on out there. I just cannot do it. I would never be able to get anything else done. And even if I had all the time in a day, I wouldn't be able to get that done. So the good thing, though, is that Tracy, Lori, and Michael, like, we've all talked about how I like to respond to certain things. And so I think they're all doing a really great job. And they all I get caught up on pretty much everything that's going on out there. So, I mean, I'm very grateful that they're being able to do this for me. And I'm sure guys of you out there, you understand.
It's wonderful too, because Lori and Michael are in there. If you guys have questions and we don't have time to get to them, they are providing the answers for you. So we're super grateful that they're able to do that for us. And we just want to also thank Christine Siebel for her super chat as well. And we want to say hi to everyone. I'm just seeing Minnesota, Georgia, Virginia, New York.
I do see one joke. He says, "You need more hands. Get Emery Smith to sew one on." Nice joke. Love that. We'll come back to that one some other time.
Hey, I'm shouting out like where they're from.
Oh, and I'm interrupting you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Got a little excited.
California. Kentucky. I mean, this is so cool. Germany, UK, Thailand, Australia. So, I mean,
fantastic.
How amazing is that? So, I want to go back to a question that I saw a little bit earlier where someone was talking about the Zimbabwe case of the children and also the Australian case. I can't remember the name of it right now.
Not Westgate, Westfield, I believe, in Australia, near Melbourne.
Where they had slightly older children, but they were both schoolyards.
Right.
And just wondering if you had looked at them together, if there were any similarities.
I have looked at both of them. I haven't done a straight up comparison, but they're both important cases. And so in the case of the 1966 Australian case, that's right outside Melbourne, in the south part of Australia, this was a case where children literally ran outside of the school. They saw a UFO. Someone had to have seen it out the window. Pardon me. And they just like ran out. So it was the 60s. People were a little crazier back then. They weren't all beaten down by the totalitarian teachers. Stay on your desk. The kids ran out. And I actually was at that schoolyard. This was about a year and a half ago. And this is a very major case at the time. So a number of these kids were in their preteen and early teen. So like 11, 12, 13-year-old kids. So definitely old enough to know what they were seeing. And so the accounts differ a little bit from what I know. So there are accounts that the craft landed, and there are also accounts that the craft did not land, I believe. Now, what I was told by Australian UFO researchers when I was there at the end of 2016 is that one of those kids, and it was a young woman, I believe it was, and that she disappeared, not really disappeared like mysteriously, but that she moved away, and that somehow she was deeply and traumatically affected by this event. But it's really hard to get a lot of the details out of it. It got a lot of attention at the time. These kids were interviewed back then. They're all very believable. They were adults as well. It wasn't all kids. Now, in the case of Ruwa, Zimbabwe, this was in 1994. It was much later. And here you've got children who were, some of them were preteens, but some were a little bit younger. We're talking 7, 8, 9 years of age, but still very much old enough to know what they saw. Now, Tracy and I happen to know one of those kids. They're all in their 30s. Our friend Emily Trim. And Emily was one of 62 children who were in a schoolyard. Now, if you haven't seen this on YouTube, I would really recommend you just go and Google, search on YouTube, 1994 Zimbabwe UFO. Mm-hmm. All right. And you will see these children being interviewed by John Mack, a Harvard psychiatrist who was very interested in UFOs. He went down there and he talked to these kids, and it's touching. And beyond that, these children are so absolutely believable. All right, these are sweet kids, intelligent kids, articulate and sincere, and you see that. So, and what they're describing is a landed craft, and in this case, beings, at least 2, possibly 3 beings. And the case of Emily and one friend of hers, a school friend of hers, they were, the way she described it, maybe 3 or 4 feet standing directly in front of a being that was their height.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine like what that had to be like? And I'm going to tell you, like, Emily Trim is absolutely 100% credible in our opinion.
I agree.
And I think in the opinions of anyone else who's spoken with her. And clearly, she doesn't go out looking for a lot of attention, but she thinks about this a lot. This has deeply affected her. And also, our friend Randall Nickerson, who we're gonna see Randall
In a few days.
and shortly. But Randall has been working on a documentary called Ariel, which is the name of the school. And he has gone through the process of interviewing many of these kids as adults. And what he has discovered is that they're all like deeply affected by that experience to this day. All right. They've never forgotten it. And they all have different opinions. Like some of them are deeply Christian. Some of them aren't. Some of them, you know, think of it as in a very positive way, and others try to push it away. But all of them have been deeply affected by this, and none of them deny it. So I consider the Ruwa Zimbabwe case one of the really most important modern contact cases that we've ever had. It's not that other people haven't had contact at even deeper levels, but this case is powerful because it affects us emotionally. And
they're at the perfect age.
yeah,
You know, I think they were around
8
to
8, 9,
11
10.
years old, something like that.
Yes.
So when you go and watch the footage that's available online, it is so touching. And I know it was actually a question last week. Someone was asking what's happening with the movie that's coming out called Ariel. And we know that it's in the final stages. And if you haven't seen it, we totally recommend going and watching the trailer. I think there's about an 8-minute trailer, and you can see this is going to be an amazing film for the UFO community and for everyone to examine, because you really get a sense these children are just bearing their hearts of exactly what happened.
That's right.
Drawing these things out, all of them telling consistent stories. They went through this range of excitement in the beginning to a little bit of fear. So just hearing that story is so amazing.
How are we doing for time? I know we normally...
We're going to check in here.
We're supposed to do this for 45 minutes. It's an hour. And here's the thing about me. I think you know this if you know anything about me. Just wind me up and I'll just go. Like, I don't really... Maybe a cup of coffee in midway and that'll keep me going. But I don't know how much time we actually have. I think we're going to have to wrap this up soon.
Yeah, I think so too. So let's see. We want to thank Peter Rabbit for the super chat. We want to say hi to our friends in Holland. Another super chat from Resbergu. Thank you so much. And I think, let me just check how we're doing here. We're going to start wrapping up.
Well, let me just say this. So one of the current interests that I have in ufology right now is I want to do a series of interviews for individuals, with individuals from around the world. Ufologists in China, ufologists in Africa, ufologists in Germany, ufologists in South America, Canada. I may do this. It's possible we can do this for a live chat, but possibly for the Richard Dolan Show, which is also on my YouTube channel. And I have felt for some years now that what we need in this field is actually, you may laugh hearing this, but I think we need more data. And some people may laugh because they may think, we have enough data, we know what we're dealing with. I would disagree. What I would say is We have a lot of data for North America. So if you want sightings reports for the US or for Canada, there's a lot there. And even that's actually very incomplete, but we have something. But try getting good sightings data for South America. Try getting it for Africa, for Asia, for Europe even. And the data we have is so incomplete. And not only that, but the knowledge we have, even without the data, that's incomplete. So what I've been saying this for years. We're in the 21st century. There's no excuse not to know what's going on around the world and not to have a solid factual foundation. So one thing that I want to do this year and moving into future years is to open up genuine communications with these researchers from around the world, talk to them, and find out what's going on. Everyone wins in that type of a situation. So, how are we doing here?
I agree. I just want to throw in one more quick question for a member who asked, what is the difference between an experiencer and an abductee? That was from Kit.
Yes. So, everyone knows what an abductee is. If you've had an abduction experience, you're an abductee. But what if you've had an experience that is not, that you don't see in such a negative way or in a pejorative way? Not everyone wants to call themselves abductees. So back in the 1990s, Professor John Mack was the first person, I believe, to start using the phrase experiencer as opposed to abductee. Because what he was saying is, look, not everyone looks at this in a negative way. Not everyone even is actually abducted. So sometimes people have an experience with these other entities that don't constitute necessarily an abduction. So what is that? So experiencer is a pretty good word to use for that. In fact, I don't know anyone who's got a better word for it at this point. So for the past 25 years, we've seen both of these words being used, sometimes side by side, sometimes interchangeably. But I think more often than not, you see them used in different contexts. And those people who tend to look at their experiences as positive will often refer to themselves as experiencers. And those who choose to look at their experience or see their experience in a more traumatic or difficult or negative way will still often refer to themselves as abductees. Look, I think both phrases are valid because there are, I mean, who am I to tell someone that your experience wasn't positive? If someone feels that it was positive, that's their choice, and they can describe it in that way. If someone feels that it was negative, I'm going to be the last person to say, oh, no, it was actually really wonderful. And there are people out there who will do this. And I just think that that's disrespectful. We don't know a lot. There's a lot that we don't know. I guess I should put it that way. There's a lot we don't know about this phenomenon. And we have a lot of work to do. And, you know, previous generations have done their best. My generation, Tracy and I are doing our best. Future generations are going to have to do their best. This is a long road.
Yep. So I know there are so many good questions in there that we didn't get to. I'm so sorry.
I saw, and I wasn't supposed to look at the chats, but I saw a few scrolling up, and I'm like, I'd like to answer this.
There are so many good questions. If you want to answer just one more, if you can keep it really short.
Yeah, fine.
You can. Do you want to answer the one that you had, or do you want me to give you one?
Why don't you give me one?
Okay, so one was about the Trump's secret space program. Let me just find that one.
Oh, let me pass that for next week.
You want to pass that? Well,
next time.
Someone had a question here that I'm being reminded of. Do you have to remote view through another person, or can you just remote view a location as the target? Which is an interesting question, and I think probably...
Why don't you take that?
No, you can pretty much remote view anything. So you can remote view through another person, and that is an incredible experience.
Tracy did this.
You set that up and try that. That is something that will change your worldview forever. I've always said that, and that's what it did for me. But you can remote view a location as the target, no problem. The thing about remote viewing is whoever is setting up the target, like, you don't want to know anything about the target. I know there's people out on YouTube who just say they're going to remote view this specific thing and they do it.
Yes.
But for me, I don't like that, because you can't be sure the ego isn't getting involved in some way. So you need to have someone who can give you a mix of targets, or That's how it works.
Let me put it this way. Tracy's exactly right. So even I knew this. People will say, have Tracy remote view such and such, or this or that. And or other people will say, have them remote view this target or that target. Remote viewing doesn't ideally work like that. Like if you're a remote viewer, you are really not supposed to have the slightest idea of what you're remote viewing. And actually, ideally, your the person giving you the assignment should not really have a crystal clear idea either. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Skip Atwater has interviews out there where he talks about how it's broken down. So if he's the person in charge, there will be a team underneath. There will be 4 teams underneath him, and each tasker, I hope I'm explaining this well,
Yeah.
who's tasking the remote viewer, only has the tiniest little part that they're remote viewing. So the Skip has the whole picture. He breaks it up into small components for each tasker, and each tasker. So again,
So it's
it
very
might be
compartmentalized.
someone is remote view, very compartmentalized.
And you can see the reason for this,
Yes.
right? Because you don't want the remote viewer to have what they call analytical overlay. The remote viewer, like Tracy was saying, you got to shut down the left brain, shut down the analytical part, and you have to be open. This is how it's supposed to work, and this is how it does work. And the more that you're focused on, what is it? I got to think this through, like the more wrong you're going to be. So you're not really going to get it that way. So you have to remove the remote viewer from the from an intellectual understanding as much as possible.
So that's the only
how it
thing
works.
about that.
So having said that, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give Tracy targets, and she'll have no idea. She thinks she'll have an idea.
He
She's
said
not gonna
that
have any
one
idea.
time, and I said, okay, that's really hard for me to figure out what you'd task me with.
She thinks
Yeah.
that she's going to figure out what I'm going to task her with, but it's not going to happen.
Right.
I'm going to do a couple of head
Tough
fakes.
one.
She won't get it. So we'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
Are we good?
So we're going to start to wrap this up. So we just want to thank everybody again for tuning in from all over the place. I want to thank everybody for the super chats. That was really cool. But we want to thank everyone because we saw there's so many cool questions, so many cool comments there. We're sorry we can't get to them all, obviously.
Let me just say again, if you like what you've seen, subscribe to the channel and put on your notifications so you don't miss another episode.
Yes, somebody also said in there that they couldn't understand exactly where the notifications were. So if you notice where it's right around here, the subscribe button is here, and there's a little bell just to the right side of it. That's how you click that.
Isn't that below? Isn't the subscribe button below?
No.
See how much I know?
So you want to click that bell, and that is going to give you those notifications. So whenever Richard releases a new video or whenever he goes live, you're going to get a notification, your own reminder. So it's just a good way to do it.
All right.
Just want to let people know what you're doing. We have a transhumanism conference coming up called True Legends, which that is September 14th through 16th, and that's in Missouri.
Go to Richard All Members events tab, and you'll see it there.
Yes, and
By the way, transhumanism. I've never done a transhumanist conference.
I know.
I'm looking forward to this one very much.
I think it'll be really cool. We're going to stay and watch some of the other speakers.
Right.
What was I going to say? I think that's it. So
All right.
Our website, richarddolanmembers.com, there's lots of free stuff there. You don't have to be a member, but if you want to know what's coming, there is a calendar there that we keep up to date. And this show is going to be every single Thursday. So when we're traveling, sometimes it will be wherever we are.
That's right.
So tune in next week, and we just want to say thank you to everyone, and we want to say thank you to our members for supporting Richard's work. Thank you to all of you for supporting Richard's work. Thank you to Lori and Michael who help us with this and to try to answer your questions and give you the links you need while this is going on. They also help to give us the questions, so they play a huge role. So I want to say thank you.
Just got a quick correction on the Australian sighting, which I saw Westall or Westfall.
Thank
Westfall.
you. That's great.
Sorry.
Yeah. So,
All right.
So I think that's it.
We're good.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. It was an honor. It was everything good. And we'll see you next week. How about that?
Sounds great. See
Stay
you soon.
strong.
Good night.
I'm going to turn this off here now. Do I know how to turn this off?
No, you don't.
Stop. Okay, bye.